everyone, I am Mark Angelo Bermejo Agloco and we will be discussing today about migration. So, for you to know about migration, migration should not be considered as a problem. There is nothing moral or immoral about moving from one country to another. Human beings have always been migratory. It is the result of their movements that areas get populated, communities experience diversity, and economies prosper. Thus, rather than looking migration in terms simply good or bad, hence treat it as a complex social phenomenon that even predates contemporary globalization. Okay, so first, what is migration? Now, there are two types of migration. The first one is the internal migration. Internal migration is refers to people moving from one area to another within one country. Ito yung mga paglipat ng mga tao sa isang lugar sa loob ng kanilang mga bansa. Kunwari ako galing ako sa Ilocos pero lumipat ako sa Tirahan sa Manila. The second one is the
International migration.
in which people cross borders one country to another.
International migration
Can be further broken down into different um, groups. So these are temporary labor migrants, illegal migrants, the refugees, the forced migration, family members, the return migrants. And in this discussion, we are able to know later on of some of these effects in migrant origin location or countries, that is, the places where migrants come from. Talking about migration effects is tricky for a few reasons. These results firstly can be observed at different levels and time periods. We are able to discuss how mobility can have micro-level effects, for example, on the immediate family members and household that an immigrant lives from. On the other hand of this spectrum, we will talk about effects at the country or original level, which were also referred as macro level effects. We can also see effects at the community level in areas where migrants come from. And also, we can refer to the ways that migration create effects as mechanisms, and these are typically characteristic or components of migration that directly lead to observed effects and origin location. And there are a number of mechanisms through which migration can affect those who stays behind in their country or places of origin. One of the most common ways which migration can have effects is through remittances, which is the money that migrants send back to their family and friends or community of origin. Other effects can be manifested is through social remittances, or the norms, values, and knowledges transferred to send back to family, friends, and communities of origin. These transfers can also be made by the networks or the relationship that can be facilitated by the country or origin and destination by the migrants. Other way that migration can manifest effects on the country of origin is by absence of the persons themselves. While this mechanism can create effects of country, community, and individual levels, and actual effects generated can be vary, and it can be both positive and negative.
Immigration is the international movement of people to a destination country of which they are not natives or where they do not possess citizenship in order to settle as permanent resident or natural citizens. Commuters, tourists, and other short-term stays in a destination country do not fall under the definition of immigration or migration. Seasonal labor immigration is sometimes included. However, as for economic effects, research suggests that migration is beneficial both to the receiving and sending countries. Research, with few exceptions, find that immigration on average has positive economic effects on the native population, but is mixed as to whether low-skilled immigration adversely affects low-skilled natives. Migration, this refers to the movement of people out of geographical area to take up residency elsewhere. A person leaving an area to take up a permanent or semi-permanent residency elsewhere is an immigrant. Immigration is the act of leaving a resident country or place of residence with the intent to settle elsewhere, to permanently leave a country. Conversely, immigration describes the movement of people into one country from another to permanently move to a country. Hence, one might immigrate from one's native country to immigrate to another country. Both are acts of migration across national or other geographical boundaries. Difference between immigration and immigration. Immigration is to come into another country to live permanently, and immigration is to leave one's country to live in another country.
Some migration movement. Immigration. This is the movement of people in geographical area to take up residency. A person entering an area to take up residency in that place is an immigrant. Immigration. This refers to the movement of people out of a geographical area to take up residency elsewhere. A person leaving an area to take up a permanent or semi-permanent residency elsewhere is an immigrant.
The most frequently heard explanation why people migrate is the push-pull theory. This expounds the idea that people move because they are pushed out of their former location. Others move because they have been pulled or attracted to someplace elsewhere. Often, the pull factors are basically the positive consequences why persons migrate. In the international level, the reasons why people move are democratic government, religious freedom, employment opportunities, or more temperate climate. These are also referred to as the voluntary reasons why people move. On the other hand, push factors are those that drive away a person from his or her place of residence to another. Often they are termed as involuntary or forced migration. People migrate as a result of political unrest, violence, plague, natural disasters, unemployment, harsh weather conditions, high cost of living, and high crime rates. Now, basically, push-pull theory is when people move because they are pushed out of their former location. Others move because they have been pulled or attracted to some place. We have three factors. The first one is the social-political factor. It is where persecution based on one's ethnicity, religion, race, politics, or culture can drive people to flee their home country. War, conflict, government persecution, or the threat of them are all major factors. Humanitarian refugees are more likely to flee armed conflict, human rights violation, or persecution. This will have an impact on where they settle because some countries have more liberal policies toward humanitarian migrants than others. In the first instance, these people will most likely to flee to the nearest safe country that accepts asylum seekers. We have the second one, the demographic and economic factors. Now, this factor is a shift's influence how people move and migrate. A growing or shrinking, aging, or young population has an impact on economic growth and employment opportunities in the countries of origin as well as the migration policies in the country of destination. Demographic and economic migration are linked to labor standards, unemployment, and others countries' overall economic health, higher wages, better employment opportunities, a higher standard of living, and educational opportunities are all pull factors. If economic conditions are unfavorable and appear to be deteriorating further, a greater number of people will most likely migrate to countries with a better outlook. Now, according to the UN International Labour Organization, Migrant workers, defined as people who migrate with the intention of finding work, numbered approximately 264 million worldwide in 2017 and accounted for nearly two-thirds of all international migrants. Almost 70% were found in high-income countries, 18.6% in upper-middle-income countries, and 10% in low-income countries. See the difference? Now, we have the third factor, the environmental factor. These will have likely to people have always fled natural disasters such as flood, hurricane, and earthquake, which have always been a driving force behind migration. However, climate change is expected to exacerbate extreme weather events, which means that more people may be forced to relocate.
Theories of migration. Neoclassical economics. The theory argues that immigration is a process of labor adjustment caused by geographic differences in the supply and demand for labor. New household economics migration. It processes that decisions about migrations are often made in the context of what is best for the entire family or household. Dual labor market theory. The theory suggests that in developed regions in the world, there are essentially two kinds of job markets, primary and secondary. Word system theory. According to the theory, migration in a natural outgrowth of disruption and dislocations that inevitably occur in the capitalist world. Network theory. The theory claims that migrants establish interpersonal ties that content migrants, former migrants, and non-migrants in origin and destination areas through ties and kindship, friendship, and shared community origin. Institutional migration. Once started, migration may also be perpetuated by institutions that develop precisely to facilitate and profit from the continued flow of immigrants. Agwan's 2009 as cited by Weeks 2011. Cumulative causation. That perspective recognized that each act of migrant change the likelihood of subsequent decision about migration because it has an impact on the social environment in both sending and receiving countries.
We have the consequences of migration. Migrants move in order to live their life better. However, there are both positive and negative consequences of migration to the individual and to sending and receiving countries that was believed by Weeks 2011. Now, the first one, consequences of migration is xenophobia. For the migrant, relocation may produce stress and anxiety as new social environment has to be negotiated. Part of the negotiation may be to deal with discrimination that often results to xenophobia. Fear and mistrust of strangers on the part of people residing in the place to which the migrant had moved. One of the ways by which migrants can cope with new environment is to seek out others who share their cultural and geographical backgrounds, sometimes called the enclave, a place in a larger community within which members of particular subgroup tend to concentrate. Likewise, on arrival to a host area, immigrant may go through a brief period of euphoria and hopefulness, a sort of honeymoon, maybe. However, this may be followed by a period of shock and depression, especially for refugees. The second one is the adaptation, acculturation, assimilation. Now, this means that immigrants undergo a process of adaptation or adjustment to the new environment, in which they adjust to the new physical and social environment and learn how best to negotiate everyday life. Some immigrants proceed to acculturation, in which they adopt the host's language, bring their diet more in line with their host culture, and make friends with the immigrant group. Others take the process of assimilation, in which children are Raised in host country do not just take on the outer trapping, but also assume the behavior and attitude of the host country. Intermarriage is often a result of assimilation. Now, we have the third one of consequences of migration. This is called the integration, inclusion, and multiculturalism. Often immigrants are treated categorically. Receiving countries have various ways of incorporating immigrants in their midst. One is integration, where there is mutual accommodation. Second is exclusion, when immigrants are kept separate from most members of the host country and are maintained in separate enclaves or ghettos. Third is multiculturalism or pluralism, when immigrants retain their ethnic communities but share the same legal rights as other members of the host society. Multiculturalism is enhanced by transnational migrants who set roots in the host society, while still maintaining strong linkages to the donor society. Also called skilled transients or transients. These are the relatively skilled worker moving internationally on assignment and in process having an impact on the area of destination while always intending to return to the other group of origin.
Okay, so we have also the contract labor migration. Before we get deeper to our topic, first we need to define what is overseas Filipino workers or OFWs. Overseas Filipinos is the term encompassing all Filipino migrants, whether permanent or temporary, illegal or unauthorized, while overseas Filipino worker represents a subject or overseas Filipino and their temporary migrants. So, what is contract labor migration? This type of migration is specific to the extent that contract labor migrants are temporary migrants. Such workers are recruited to the precise specification of their occupation at the destination. So we have also the common categories of Filipino migrants: the temporary migrants and the irregular migrants or illegal migrants. So, temporary migrants, the Filipino migrants who stays overseas for works regularly and properly documented, and this includes the land-based and the sea-based Filipino workers, meaning to say they're facing a contract that they will stay on the host of the country for the limited time. We have also the irregular migrants. These are the Filipino migrants who are not properly documented or without valid residences. In other words, they are illegal migrants. In the Philippines, illegal migrants are also called TNT or Tago ng Tago. Here in the Philippines, the migration upholding to the abroad became a culture, and later on it became common and acceptable to the Filipinos as an option strategy for a better life living. For decades, sizable number of the Filipinos have left home in search of permanent and or temporary works overseas. It became a trend long to the attributed Philippine economy. Philippines launched an overseas employment program in 1970. The thrust was finding labor markets. The Filipino not only work at Oil Ridge but Labor Short Gulf Cooperation Council or GGC, and one of the destinations of the Filipino workers is the Middle East. But in later 1970s, labor and workers in other countries increases surfacing the labor migration problems such as poor work conditions, are not giving proper wages in the workers, and also OFWs are being abused by employers. However, government developed a number of constitutional laws and policies protecting the OFWs and their families. After that, the Philippines became the major source of country of workers and talents for global labor while providing the protection for OFWs. And if I'm not mistaken, the Philippines ranked third after India and China as major recipient of remittances.
Factors affecting labor migration. They are demographic processes, economic processes, political processes, various institutional processes, and social processes. Demographic processes. In Asia, where population is high, the rapid labor force growth has forced government to look for export outlets for their labor surplus. The dramatic growth in the population of Asia is the result of an increase in the number of people surviving the reproductive age. Population growth accompanies changes in fertility rate due to better education about birth control. According to the World Bank, the aging population and low fertility rates are to blame for the increase in population as 36% of the world's population over 65 currently live in East Asia. The World Bank projects that the 211 million people living in East Asia will rise over time. Many countries in Asia have relied on their young population. However, with changing demographics, they may lose around 15% of their working age population by 2040. Higher incomes and better education have not only led to longer life expectancy and lower fertility rates but have also caused families to move and change social values. Economic processes. These pertain to unequal levels of development and the need on the part of the fast-growing economies, deeply involved in export-led growth and in the international division of labor, to keep their comparative advantages, either by investing in every cheap labor countries or by importing cheap labor. Export-led growth has a lot to do with self-sufficiency. Import substitution, on the other hand, is the opposite. It is an effort by countries to become self-sufficient and lower their dependence on developed nations. They do this by developing their own industry so they can compete with other countries that rely on exports. Keep reading to learn more about export-led growth and its history. Political processes. Among these is the active policy of certain countries to export labor some time ago, where the national plan contains objectives for female immigration and remittances. Most migrant workers pay relatively large sums to labor recruiters to access temporary jobs in destination countries, leaving them indebted and therefore more vulnerable to workplace abuses, and in some cases human trafficking. Guest workers are usually tied to the one job and employer by contracts and visas, which makes them inherently vulnerable. If guest workers lose their jobs because they complain of wage theft or abuse, for example, they lose their right to be in the destination country, along with any financial investment made to work abroad, including the payment of recruitment fees. Various institutional processes. This involve the active parts played by subcontractors and transnational corporation investing in cheap labor countries, in offshore production sites, through turnkey projects and their own international labor markets. When considering entering international markets, there are some significant strategic and tactical decisions to be made. Exporting, joint ventures, direct investment, franchising, licensing, and various other forms of strategic alliance can be considered as market entry modes. Each entry mode has different pros and cons, addressing issues like cost control, speed to market, legal barriers, and cultural barriers with different degree of efficiency. Social processes. These include the network of communities, ethnic proximity, religious, women's desire for economic independence, higher job expectation of national population even in labor surplus economies, and the selection of increasingly skilled migrants by countries of immigration. Economic disparity between developing and developed economies encourage the movement of skilled labor from the former to the latter. Temporary migration visas allow for an increase in the rate of circular migration. Changes in the ecological environment have a potential to worsen food and water insecurity in various parts of the globe. Limited access to food and water resources may push people to migrate to to migrate to countries where these resources are more readily available.